Dale found the text from Todd Jenkins on Brenda's phone while she was in the shower. Last night was incredible. Can't wait for Austin next week. The words froze him mid-sip of coffee, the digital glow a stark spotlight on 19 years of shared mornings. His chest tightened, a cold knot forming where his heart used to be, exposing him to a truth he hadn't dared to acknowledge. Her casual omission hit harder than any shouted accusation. The glow from the screen felt like a physical heat against Dale Miller's palm. The message from Todd Jenkins, clear and stark, confirmed what Dale had been working hard not to know. Last night was incredible. Can't wait for Austin next week. The timestamp, 3:47 a.m., floated below the words like an anchor, pulling his world down. 19 years, he thought, not with a shout or a slammed door, but with the quiet click of a digital message found on the kitchen counter while his wife showered upstairs. Dale placed the phone back precisely where he'd found it, aligning it with the edge of the granite. The stainless steel of the coffee maker hummed. Oblivious, he poured himself a cup, the steam rising, blurring the clean lines of their kitchen. His mind, accustomed to processing complex data and identifying system vulnerabilities, began to work. It wasn't panic, not exactly. It was a cold, precise assessment of a catastrophic system failure. Brenda Peterson came down the stairs a few minutes later, smelling of jasmine soap. She poured her own coffee, avoiding his eyes as she stirred in creamer. "The Austin trip is confirmed for next week," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Delridge Pharma is sending me to mentor some of the newer talent. Todd will be there too." She gestured vaguely with her spoon. Dale nodded, took a sip. The coffee tasted bitter this morning. "It's going to be intense," she continued, looking past him towards the window. "Long days, networking events. Probably won't have much time to call." Dale feigned understanding, a low hum of agreement in his throat. It was a role he'd refined over the years, a practiced neutrality that served to keep the peace. He watched her, noting the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her cup, a detail he cataloged without judgment. His sister Sharon had tried to tell him, though not in so many words. "You're still young, Dale," she'd said during their last video call, "but you're shrinking. Where's that guitar? Where's your camera?" He'd laughed it off, blaming work, blaming the routine. But now Sharon's words settled into the quiet spaces of his mind, heavy and true. He had let himself be erased, bit by bit. Brenda's increased distance, her excuses for late nights at the office, the sudden weekend workshops that always stretched into Sunday evenings, they all snapped into place, forming a clear, unbroken line. The narrative she'd spun for him, for them, now lay exposed as a thinly veiled cover story. He thought of the quiet compromises they had made over the years, the routines they had built, a life meticulously constructed in Virginia Beach. No kids, just them, and now, not even that. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual, not peaceful, but laden. A quiet dread settled into his bones, yet it was mixed with a strange, analytical clarity. His systems analyst brain was in overdrive, not processing emotion, but information. Every late-night email, every forgotten anniversary, every time she'd chosen a conference call over dinner, the data points accumulated. He glanced at the kitchen counter again, the expanse of gray granite Brenda had insisted on. "It ties the whole room together, Dale," she'd said, "gives it a solid, perfect feel." Now it just felt like a stage, a set piece for a drama unfolding without his consent. He began compiling a mental list, not of accusations, but of everything he needed to confirm, every vulnerability in their shared system. Logins, bank statements, travel itineraries. A quiet anger, not the gut-wrenching pain of heartbreak, began to simmer beneath his calm exterior. This wasn't a personal affront. It was a catastrophic security breach. And he, the primary architect of their shared life, was responsible for fixing it. He would identify the exploit, contain the damage, and restore the system. He would do it methodically, precisely. For the next week, while Brenda was at Delridge Pharma, Dale methodically began his intelligence gathering. The home office became his quiet command center. He started with the familiar, the joint accounts, the credit card statements. The numbers, usually so predictable, now held a coded message. Dinner reservations for two at places he'd never heard of. A small Italian bistro downtown, a seafood restaurant near Norfolk. Hotel charges surfaced from cities Brenda had cited as single attendee conferences, rooms booked on specific dates she swore she'd been alone, or with groups of colleagues. The receipts showed only one guest. He moved to the digital landscape, an arena he knew intimately. Brenda had a habit of leaving her email open on the old laptop in the study, the one she rarely used. He sifted through the archives, finding threads that confirmed his suspicions. Casual work emails from Todd Jenkins morphed into increasingly personal exchanges, then into hushed, coded messages about project updates that clearly had nothing to do with pharmaceuticals. He found photos too, not explicit, but telling. Brenda and Todd at a beachside bar, laughing, her hand resting on his arm, a closeness that went beyond professional camaraderie. Their shared iPad, typically used for streaming movies, held another cache of synced text messages. He scrolled through weeks of conversations between Brenda and Todd. The early messages were innocuous, work-related. Then they shifted, jokes, late-night chatter, then the familiar intimacy. "Miss you," from Todd. "You too," from Brenda, followed by a string of emojis she never used with Dale. It was all there, laid out in neat digital packets. One evening, a few days before Brenda's Austin trip, Dale lay in bed, feigning sleep. Brenda got up, went into the bathroom, closing the door almost completely, but not quite. He heard the low hum of her phone. Speakerphone. He listened, his breath held shallow. "If only you weren't married," Brenda whispered, her voice laced with a raw vulnerability Dale hadn't heard in years. Todd's voice, surprisingly clear through the small gap in the door, filled the silent bedroom. "Lana and I haven't connected in years. It's just paperwork at this point. You know that." There was a casual dismissiveness in Todd's tone that chilled Dale more than any shouted confession. "Still," Brenda replied, "the conference. People talk. I worry." Todd chuckled, a low, confident sound. "We'll find our moments, Brenda. We always do." Dale lay there, his heart hammering against his ribs, a dull thud in the quiet room. Yet his mind remained cold, clear. The sound of their voices, the casual certainty in Todd's tone, Brenda's desperate longing, it all clicked into place. He wasn't heartbroken, not in the way he imagined a man should be when his life fell apart. Instead, he felt a strange, unsettling relief. The uncertainty, the gnawing suspicion, had been far worse. Now he had his answers. The system was compromised, the breach confirmed. The next morning, after Brenda left for work, Dale made a call. "Carl," he began, "it's Dale Miller. It's been a while." Carl Jensen, a childhood friend who had traded their dusty Midwestern streets for a corner office overlooking the Atlantic, was known in legal circles as the clean break specialist. He handled high-stakes divorces with precision, prioritizing strategy over emotion. Carl's voice was warm, surprised. "Dale, good to hear from you, though I'm guessing it's not for golf." "No, Carl, it's not for golf," Dale confirmed, his voice flat. "I need to talk to you about some system vulnerabilities. A total breakdown, actually." They set a meeting for 2 days later. Dale spent the intervening time finalizing the USB drive. Every email, every text, every financial record. Screenshots, dates, times. He categorized it all into neat folders, labeled by type of evidence. When he walked into Carl's office, the wide expanse of the ocean, visible through the panoramic window, seemed like a stark, indifferent backdrop to the contained storm he carried within him. He sat across from Carl, the small USB drive heavy in his pocket, ready to lay out the full, meticulous extent of Brenda's betrayal. Dale met Carl Jensen at his office, the ocean a muted gray under a cool morning sky. He sat across the wide mahogany desk and slid the small USB drive forward. "Everything's here, Carl," he said, his voice level. "Brenda and Todd Jenkins. He's her subordinate at Delridge. It's been going on for at least 6 months." Carl picked up the drive, turning it over in his fingers. "Subordinate, you say?" He raised an eyebrow. "And she approved his promotion recently, didn't she?" "I remember you mentioning that." Dale nodded. 2 months ago, he's now senior project lead. She pushed for it. Carl whistled, a low, drawn-out sound. "Delridge Pharma, a big outfit. They've got a zero-tolerance policy on relationships with direct reports, especially if there is any perceived power imbalance. Brenda was always so proud of how strictly they enforce that kind of thing." She was, Dale confirmed, the memory a flat echo. Carl's expression sharpened. This gives us leverage, Dale, not just for the divorce, but for everything else. He tapped the USB drive against the desk. Her career, for one, they don't mess around with compliance. They'd want to keep this quiet. Dale looked at his friend. I want it all, Carl. The house, the investments, everything. I want a clean break, and I want her to understand the bottom. Carl leaned back, considering. That's a tall order, Dale. But with this might just be possible. They spent the next 2 hours mapping out a meticulous strategy. Carl outlined the steps, the timelines, the legal maneuvers. Dale, in turn, provided the precise details, the dates, the financial specifics. By the time he left Carl's office, the sun was higher, glinting off the water. He carried a thin beige folder under his arm containing preliminary divorce papers and a step-by-step plan. Saturday morning, Brenda was in Austin. Dale, out of habit, was watering the lawn, the spray cool on his hands. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, thumbing open Facebook. He saw Brenda's post, a photo. Her and Todd pressed close, cocktails in their hands, their smiles broad. The caption read, "My real partner." He noticed her sister, Linda Peterson, had already liked the post. Dale stared at the image. No shock, no sudden stab of pain, just a quiet confirmation of what he already knew. The grass glistened under the morning sun. He finished watering the azaleas, replaced the hose, and walked inside. Without a word, without a change in his expression, he retrieved the beige folder from the study, walked into the kitchen, and placed it squarely in the center of the granite island. The dull cream color, a stark contrast to the dark stone. He returned to his phone, pulled up Brenda's Facebook post, and typed a short comment. Congratulations. Divorce papers on the kitchen table. He pressed send. His phone immediately began to vibrate, a barrage of calls and texts from unknown numbers, and then from Brenda herself. He ignored them all. He locked the screen, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat of his truck, and drove across town to his sister Sharon Miller's house. Sharon opened the door, a can of beer in her hand. She looked at him, her eyes searching. You actually did it, didn't you? She said, pushing the beer into his hand. Took you long enough. She watched him for a moment, then sighed, gesturing him inside. You've been shrinking, Dale. I watched you give up the guitar, then the photography, becoming just Brenda's husband. It was never you. He took a long swallow of the beer, the cold liquid going down smooth. Dale woke in Sharon's guest room, the unfamiliar quiet, a stark contrast to the patterned silence of his own house. He hadn't slept deeply, more like drifting, the edges of his consciousness catching on Sharon's words. You've been shrinking, Dale. Becoming just Brenda's husband. He'd given up the guitar, the photography, one interest after another, letting them fall away like neglected tools. It was a truth he hadn't fully acknowledged until now that everything was stripped bare. He got up before Sharon was awake, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat at her kitchen table, his laptop open. The cool precision he'd cultivated over the past week was still with him. Today marked the next phase of his plan. His first move was the anonymous email. He crafted it carefully, devoid of emotion, purely factual. The subject line read, Ethics violation by senior management, Brenda Peterson. He addressed it to Delridge Pharma's Human Resources Department using a burner email account. Attached were the screenshots. Brenda's Facebook post, the one proclaiming Todd as her real partner, clearly dated and publicly visible. He included a copy of her official conference calendar, showing both her and Todd in Austin, the dates aligning perfectly with the Facebook post. He also attached a redacted organizational chart, highlighting Brenda's direct supervisory role over Todd Jenkins. The crucial piece of evidence, however, was a series of text messages he'd compiled, demonstrating their intimate relationship had begun months before Todd's recent promotion. He explicitly noted that Brenda had personally championed and approved that promotion. The email was concise, devastating in its factual accuracy. He reviewed it twice, ensured there were no identifying markers, and hit send. The digital message disappeared into the corporate ether, a silent grenade lobbed into Brenda's carefully constructed professional life. Next, he moved to the financial connections. He called their bank, then the investment firms. Using the pre-approved legal documents Carl had prepared, he systematically removed Brenda's access to all joint accounts and shared credit cards. His voice remained calm, steady, as he navigated the automated systems and spoke to customer service representatives. He left her with her personal checking account, the one she used for incidentals, and her single personal credit card, knowing its balance was already near its limit, mostly from her designer clothes habit. He confirmed the changes, received digital confirmations, and felt a quiet click in his own system. Another vulnerability sealed. His own 401k, a substantial sum built over 20 years, was transferred into a trust with Sharon as the beneficiary. Carl had assured him it was a temporary legal maneuver, protecting the assets during the divorce proceedings, making them difficult for Brenda to touch. He confirmed the transfer with the financial advisor, a quick, efficient conversation that felt like severing a final, delicate cord. The last call he made that morning was to Gary Olson. Gary had been a colleague of Brenda's at Delridge years ago, a competent manager whom Brenda had orchestrated out of the company during a departmental restructuring, supposedly due to performance issues. Dale knew it had been a political maneuver, Brenda clearing a path for her own ascent. Gary had always harbored a deep, simmering resentment. "Gary, it's Dale Miller," he said. There was a moment of silence. "Dale, wow. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Gary's voice was cautious. Dale went straight to the point. "I need your help with something related to Brenda. Off the record, information gathering." He briefly explained the HR email, the nature of the ethics violation. "I know you still have friends in HR there, people who might notice if an investigation starts." Gary listened, and Dale could almost hear the slow smile forming on the other end of the line. Brenda Peterson, a senior manager caught sleeping with her subordinate and pushing his promotion. Gary chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That's rich. She always played by the book, or so she said." "Yeah, Dale. I'd be delighted to be your eyes and ears. More than delighted, actually. It'd be a pleasure to watch her empire crumble." Dale thanked him, the conversation ending quickly. He closed his laptop, the last connection severed. He looked out Sharon's kitchen window at the quiet street, the world outside still moving at its usual pace, unaware of the methodical destruction he had just unleashed. Sunday evening, the house felt emptier than usual as Dale returned. Brenda was still in Austin, blissfully unaware, no doubt. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the loudest sound. Dale moved through the rooms with a focused intent. He went to Brenda's closet, her dresser, her jewelry box. Systematically, he began to box up her clothes piece by piece, folding them neatly, almost clinically. Her high heels, her cashmere sweaters, the small silver earrings she favored. He left only the bare essentials, a few practical outfits, a toothbrush, a basic set of toiletries. Nothing more. He carried the boxes out to his SUV, loading them with a steady, unhurried pace. They filled the back of the vehicle completely. He drove across town to the storage facility he'd rented under Sharon's name. The unit was clean, well lit. He paid for 3 months in advance. Then, standing in the stark concrete corridor, he composed a text message. He sent the storage unit's address and the access code to Brenda's personal email account, knowing she would find it. He wanted her to have her belongings, but on his terms, without a physical key to his house. Monday morning, the first thing Dale did was call a locksmith. By noon, all the locks on the house had been changed, new keys, new security. He removed Brenda's old house key from her keyring, which he found tucked away in her jewelry box. He placed it precisely on the kitchen counter, a dull, metallic gleam beside the beige folder containing the divorce papers. The small acts of control were not about anger, but about order, reestablishing the system parameters. At precisely 2:17 p.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from Gary Olson. "Broke down," the message read. "They opened a case. HR is already digging. Director called emergency meeting with legal." A cold satisfaction, thin as ice on a winter pond, settled over Dale. He imagined the dominoes lined up perfectly, beginning to fall. Carl Jensen had predicted this exact sequence, the initial tremors within the corporate structure. It was just as he had planned, just as he had architected. He reread Gary's text, then deleted it. The data point was recorded. He spent the rest of Monday and Tuesday working from home, monitoring his own systems, waiting. The world, oblivious to his quiet machinations, continued its churn. He considered how often life's biggest disruptions began with such mundane actions. A text message, an email, a seemingly innocent photo. And how those small, costly choices inevitably unfold, revealing the true nature of things. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Tuesday afternoon, Gary called. His voice was brimming with a suppressed glee that was almost palpable through the phone line. "You're not going to believe this, Dale," Gary began, the words tumbling out. "Brenda and Todd, they got pulled into separate conference rooms today. Full formal inquiry. Head of HR, legal counsel, the whole 9 yards. Dale listened, saying nothing. "They're digging deep, man," Gary continued, relishing every detail. "Found explicit messages on their company phones. And get this, evidence of company funds being used for their little rendezvous. Hotel charges, those fancy dinners, all under the guise of business expenses for their projects." Gary paused, taking a breath. "Brenda is apparently a wreck. Todd's lawyer is already involved, but the paper trail is clear. They crossed a lot of lines." Dale nodded slowly to himself, the receiver pressed to his ear. The system was responding exactly as expected. Brenda returned home late Tuesday night, exhausted, her mind still reeling from the day's HR interrogation at Delridge. The accusations had been swift, precise, and utterly bewildering. She slid her key into the lock, twisted, but it didn't budge. She tried again, then again, a jolt of confusion running through her. The key wouldn't turn. It didn't fit. She looked down at her keyring, then up at the front door, a cold dread creeping into her stomach. A flicker of something on the kitchen counter caught her eye through the window. Her old keyring lying next to that beige folder, the one Dale had left. Her phone began to vibrate, a relentless buzz. Calls from Delridge, from Linda, from friends, all sounding confused, alarmed, demanding answers she didn't have. She unlocked her phone, scrolling past the missed calls to her Facebook notifications. Dale's comment, stark and public, stood out. "Congratulations, divorce papers on the kitchen table." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated. This was Dale's revenge. She remembered the text message, the storage unit code. She found it buried in her personal email. With a growing sense of panic, she drove to the address, her mind a blur of anger and disbelief. When she opened the unit, her breath caught. Her clothes, her jewelry, her life, all neatly packed into anonymous boxes, exiled from her home. The stark reality hit her harder than any accusation. Finally, she called Dale. Her voice was raw, laced with fury. "What the hell is going on, Dale?" she demanded, the words bursting out. "My key doesn't work. My stuff is in a storage unit, and Delridge is accusing me of God knows what." Dale's voice was calm, unnervingly collected, a stark contrast to her own escalating panic. "Brenda," he said, without a trace of emotion, "you need to speak to Carl Jensen. All communication will go through my attorney from now on." Then, a click. He hung up. She stared at her phone, stunned. Attorney? What attorney? She tried to log into their joint bank accounts only to find them inaccessible. Her credit cards, too, were declined. The grocery store, the gas station, her regular coffee shop, all rejected. Her financial world, once so stable, was now in ruins. Desperate, she called Linda Peterson. "Linda, I need your help. Dale's gone crazy. He's locked me out, frozen my accounts. I need somewhere to stay." Linda's voice was distant, hesitant. "Brenda, I saw Dale's post on Facebook. Everyone saw it. What's going on with Todd? In Delridge? I don't know, Brenda. This is a lot." Linda, who always prided herself on being Brenda's biggest cheerleader, now sounded conflicted, wary. The public nature of Dale's declaration had clearly shifted her sister's loyalty. Then Todd Jenkins called. His voice was not the confident, charming tone she knew. It was desperate, angry. "What did you do, Brenda?" he spat. "They're tearing me apart. My wife, Lana, she knows everything. She found the messages. She's threatening to leave. You dragged me into this." He blamed her, every word a bitter lash. Brenda listened, numb, as Todd detailed the seriousness of the corporate charges. Not just the affair, but the misuse of company funds, the expense reports. It wasn't just her job. It was her entire career, her reputation that was threatened. The carefully curated image she had built was crumbling, piece by piece. She scrambled, trying to find her own attorney, but without funds, she struggled to secure representation of Carl Jensen's caliber. The lawyer she called asked for retainers she couldn't access. The high-powered firms Carl worked with were out of reach. She was on her own, adrift, in a storm Dale had so meticulously unleashed. The Delridge Pharma investigation, fueled by Dale's precise documentation and Gary Olson's internal vigilance, concluded swiftly. The outcome was clear. Brenda Peterson and Todd Jenkins were both terminated. The official reasons cited were ethics violations, abuse of power, and misuse of company resources, a clinical dismantling of their professional lives. The news spread through their professional circles like wildfire, a quiet hum on LinkedIn and whispered phone calls, staining Brenda's once stellar reputation beyond any hope of repair. Headhunters who once pursued her with fervor now politely declined her calls. Brenda's attempt to contest the divorce was met with Carl Jensen's airtight case. Carl, with Dale sitting quietly beside him, systematically presented every piece of evidence Dale had meticulously collected. The text messages, the expense reports, the hotel bookings, the confirmed timeline of their affair predating Todd's promotion, all laid bare. Carl dismantled Brenda's claims of spousal support, highlighting her corporate malfeasance and the demonstrable infidelity as a breach of marital trust. There was no room for ambiguity. The court ruled heavily in Dale's favor. He was awarded the house, the bulk of their joint investments, and a substantial portion of Brenda's remaining assets. Brenda was left with minimal funds, her maxed-out credit card, a ruined career, and a public image that was beyond salvage. The perfect life she had so carefully constructed was now reduced to its foundations, exposed to the cold light of day. She tried to lean on Todd, but he was facing his own wreckage. Lana Jenkins, his wife, had filed for divorce, wielding the same evidence Delridge HR had uncovered. Todd, financially unstable and consumed by his own downfall, offered Brenda no solace, only recriminations and anger. Their shared shame was a bond neither of them wanted. Even Linda Peterson, Brenda's sister, finally distanced herself. "Brenda," she'd said during a strained phone call, "I just can't. Not after all this. What you did, it wasn't right. I can't condone it." The line went dead, severing the last familial tie Brenda had hoped to salvage. Dale felt no joy, no elation, only a quiet, resolute satisfaction. It was a profound sense of closure, the completion of a complex project. He reflected on the quiet life they had once built, the routines, the shared silences. He realized now that it had all been built on Brenda's carefully constructed lies, a fragile facade that had finally crumbled under the weight of its own deceit. The house, the quiet neighborhood, the illusion of shared purpose, all gone, replaced by a stark, unsettling clarity. Days later, outside the courthouse, after the final papers had been signed, Brenda waited for Dale. Her face was etched with defeat, lines of exhaustion and bitterness around her eyes. Her hair, usually so meticulously styled, hung limp. "Dale," she began, her voice raw, cracking, "please, can't we just talk? Try to understand?" Dale stopped, turned, and looked at her. Truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years, past the practiced smile and the carefully chosen clothes. He saw the woman, stripped bare of her artifice, hollowed out by her choices. He saw no triumph in her defeat, only the harsh reality of consequences. Without a word, without a gesture, he simply turned and walked away. The case was closed, the system restored, the divorce was finalized. The papers were signed, the assets divided, or rather, largely awarded to Dale. He sat alone in the Virginia beach house, the silence no longer a heavy burden, but a canvas. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of gulls, these were the new sounds of his independence. He went up to the attic, dust motes dancing in the slivers of light. From a forgotten corner, he pulled out his old acoustic guitar, its case scarred with years of neglect. He opened it, the faint scent of old wood and memory filling the air. Slowly he began to tune it, the the strings creaking, then settling, the first tentative chords ringing out, a sound he hadn't made in years. Sharon's words echoed, "Where's that guitar?" He realized he'd stopped playing not because he'd lost interest, but because Brenda had always preferred the silence. He started planning a solo photography trip, envisioning the wide, flat beauty of the Midwestern landscape he'd left behind. Old haunts, small towns, the kind of mundane beauty he had always found compelling. His camera, long relegated to a shelf, felt natural in his hands again. Sharon visited frequently, a steady, grounding presence. She didn't offer advice unless asked, mostly just listened, her quiet company helping Dale navigate the strange new terrain of his freedom. He started rediscovering the man he'd been before Brenda, or perhaps the man he was always meant to be. News of Brenda filtered through Carl Jensen, sparse and clinical. She had moved out of state, taking on low-paying administrative work. Her reputation in pharmaceuticals was irrevocably destroyed, a casualty of the Delridge ethics violations. Todd Jenkins, too, had vanished from their social circle, his career in tatters, his marriage to Lana ending in a messy public divorce. Their carefully constructed lives, both professional and personal, had crumbled. Dale reflected on his actions. He hadn't sought vengeance and anger. It had been a calculated pursuit of justice, a regaining of his dignity. He had simply exposed the truth, and the system, both corporate and legal, had responded as it was designed to. There was no joy, no triumphant feeling, just a quiet equilibrium. He started reconnecting with old friends, finding comfort in familiar, uncomplicated conversations. He picked up new hobbies, woodworking, a quiet satisfaction in shaping raw material. He began to rebuild a life that was truly his own, not one defined by Brenda's ambitions or preferences. One afternoon, he started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding quiet companionship in the soft purrs of cats and the enthusiastic wagging of dogs. It was a simple purpose, far removed from the complex systems he usually managed, yet just as rewarding. The Virginia Beach house, with its granite countertops and its staged perfection, felt hollow now. He sold it, finding a smaller, cozier place nestled deeper inland. It felt more authentic, less a stage for someone else's performance. He exchanged a final, brief, impersonal email with Carl Jensen. "Thank you, Carl," he wrote, "for the clean break." He found a quiet peace, understanding that while betrayal leaves scars, it also clears the way. It strips away the facades, forcing an honest look at what remains. And from that hard-won truth, a new future, however subtle, can finally begin. The divorce was finalized, the legal proceedings concluded. Dale sat alone in his house, the silence no longer echoing with unspoken tensions, but offering a quiet, expansive canvas. He thought of his old guitar still in the attic waiting. Sharon's words about him shrinking finally resonated as a call to reclaim the parts of himself he'd let fade. He felt no triumph, no desire to gloat, just the steady hum of a system brought back to order. Brenda had moved out of state, her career in tatters, a distant consequence of her choices. Todd Jenkins, too, had vanished, his own life unraveling with equal speed. Dale rarely thought of them, their stories now separate, irrelevant to his own. He understood his actions hadn't been about anger, but about a cold, necessary justice. He had laid bare the truth, and the world had responded. Slowly, he was building a new life, unburdened by deceit, finding quiet purpose in simple routines and rediscovered passions. The old house, once a stage, would soon be sold, making way for a future rooted in hard-won honesty,